Hi, I'm Ron Saporta, and I'm recording my Campus Energy 2024 talk. Hopefully, you had a chance to come see us live. It's probably a lot more engaging with some great opportunity for questions. But nonetheless, let's talk about a playbook for collaborating on decarbonization. Today, we're going to talk about both what our vision and goals were for the project, our outcomes. The project itself was called Project LEAP. I'll just spend a minute talking about what it is. But in terms of what I think are the important takeaways, is the procurement model that we utilized, the financial mechanisms, as well as our master plan and our project. So how does UFD fare in the land of decarbonization? This is a graph that we use as part of our utilities master plan. The data itself is a bit old, actually. I don't think it comes from like 2018 or something like that. But the whole key message here is that my head is in the way, is that you can see a lot of our peers, both US and Canadian counterparts, having long-term plans to get to net zero, and our plan ended right there. We didn't really have a plan beyond 2030, which I think is the key message here. And we definitely didn't have a plan that is anywhere near, there we go, anywhere near what our partners and peers were doing. So we started off by making a commitment to become climate positive by the year 2050. And we did that by, in essence, setting these three goals. First of which is the responsible management of our growth. We actually plan to almost double the size of our campus between now and 2050. And we wanted to make sure our plans allowed for and included that growth, all the while cutting our emissions. We need to renew our existing and aged utilities. In fact, we have one of Canada's oldest and largest district energy systems, over 200 connected buildings built about 120 years ago. So it's in desperate need of some renewal. And lastly, we wanted to make sure that we had resilient low carbon systems built into this district energy solution. And when we layered all of these plans together, we came up with this long-term carbon projection that accounts for our strategy. And you can see here it gets us to net zero. And then we started to challenge ourselves. And in fact, there's actually a group of students and some faculty members that said, why stop there? If we can actually get to net zero, what happens if we add another solar panel? What if we had 100? What if we had 1,000? We end up in this territory of net negative emissions. And since we're fundamentally optimists, we didn't want to come up with a net negative strategy. So we came up with the term climate positive. And that's the strategy that we had in front of us. We then challenged ourselves, pardon me, and we took a group of our energy engineers, our utilities folks, we all got into a room and we said, what should be our first project to do this? And it actually first started off with this name called Project 50, which was meant to say, how do we reduce our emissions by 50%? Subsequently, marketing people got involved and it became LEAP, and you'll see why in a moment. But it fundamentally had these three things. First of which was district energy modernization. We're pulling out our 1960s vintage boilers and putting in electric boilers and electric heat pumps. We also are looking at doing building retrofit at some of our biggest energy hogs. These are primarily wet lab buildings, those buildings we all have that consume quite a lot of energy. And the intent here is to reduce our energy consumption there. That yields a bit of utility savings, and then we can use that utility savings to invest into our central plant and start to use electricity over natural gas, which in our jurisdiction is a more expensive fuel source. And lastly, we have quite a significant geo-exchange field underneath our historic campus. And we wanted to integrate that into our district energy system. It's a bit of foreshadowing there, because in a couple of slides, I'll talk about how that came to be and why that's important to the project. And what we did is we leveraged this model that we call a performance-based or outcomes-based procurement that I'll talk about in a moment. But what we did was we developed that internal, we came up with that target that you can see right over there. And then we went out to the market, and I'll show you in a minute how we did that we thought was a bit novel, definitely in our jurisdiction. And the market came back to us with some amazing, amazing results, actually getting us even further along our plan about a decade earlier, reducing a significant amount of carbon as a result. And we did that not by taking the concept study that we had, that our energy engineers, our utilities teams developed, but we actually took that concept study, put it out to market, and then told everybody, we got two goals. We want you to be NPV positive, and we want you to cut our emissions by at least 50%, or the 46,000 tons that are here. And we leveraged this outcomes-based procurement model, which actually comes from the U.S. Department of Energy, which sort of took that, modified it for our jurisdiction. But fundamentally, what it is we did an open call for energy service providers, shortlisted to 3, and then we did a 6-month-long design competition with these 3 firms. That included commercially confidential meetings. It included an opportunity for each one of them to come on campus wherever they needed to develop these strategies. And as an outcome, we ended up with 3 completely different designs of how to achieve those 2 fundamental goals. And that was a huge opportunity for us. It enabled us to have, to be able to make a great selection around what we want to put in place. And then what we also did is we had a stipend in place for the 2 firms that weren't successful, which also then enabled us to leverage a bit of the novel solutions they had to incorporate it into what is ultimately a solid long-term plan. One thing I wanted to point out that I think was unique about this was how we signaled to the market what was important to us. And this is our evaluation matrix, and probably was embedded within here, not overly obvious, are these last 2 numbers over here. Our MPV calculator, we released a standardized calculation tool that all the proponents filled out. But what we said to everybody was that if you had an MPV of 0, you got 0 points. And if you had an MPV of 2 million, you got 20. If you have 3 million, you still got 20. And we felt it was really important to signal to everybody we needed an NPV positive project such that we have the savings to finance the debt or pay the debt and so on. But it wasn't a dollars only project. If you got us 2 million, that was enough. Where you could then get and differentiate yourself is on that next item, which was all around the carbon emissions reduction. So we said 2 million, that's all we need. Everything else, invest in getting us the biggest carbon reduction you can. And that's how we got, in my mind, that jump between what was our target and be able to achieve it so much with a lot less, or a lot faster. This was quite a novel approach, and it got some great attention from the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, which is one of the people financing this project. We are one of the first and so far only university or college to take advantage of this financing stream. But it was a great opportunity for us to inject capital cost effectively from a capital perspective and a rates perspective, and then pay it back through the savings of the project. So here's where I think the better conversation, or at least the more interesting conversation occurs, which is what did we sort of learn? And I think at a strategy level, we developed that master plan that I showed you the graph of. And that master plan called for this interconnected nodal strategy, kind of shown graphically here. Where we had distributed generation, we had some electric boilers, other technologies built into that. And what this project really challenged us, especially the proponent submissions, is to start to think not so much just about the generation, but how can you implement and incorporate more widespread and in-depth heat recovery into that plan. If we can get the heat recovery, then we can reduce our boiler capacity. And that was quite an interesting, novel approach. Maybe not novel in the words, but how it was implemented in the project was quite unique. And I think it fundamentally boils down to these two big things. First of which was that was this proposal around a gas-driven turbine, a cogen unit that had phenomenal payback, had good deployment of capital, gave us the return such that we can then invest further into deep energy retrofits and other technologies. However, at one point in the project evaluation, when we got it down to our preferred proponent, we had a significant decision to make. And it was just fundamentally is putting in a gas-based appliance, a cogen unit, aligned with the vision of the project, which was all about emissions reduction. And, after a lot of back and forth, and what I know for sure was frustration on our part, frustration with our energy partner at the end of the day, we decided to remove it. It was a material removal of CapEx, but more to that, it actually was an outsized removal then of the associated savings, which meant we started to have some problems on our financial KPIs. Without the cogen, we couldn't service the debt because the savings weren't there. With the cogen, we were just emphasized burning of more fossil fuels, just was completely misaligned. That's when the idea of integrating Landmark or our geo exchange system came to light. In fact, this was one of the key innovations that the Energy Partner brought forward, which was looking at geo exchange, looking at heat recovery a bit more in depth, and in fact proposing and now implementing a three-stage tiered heat pump solution where we have heat recovery that feeds into another stage where we can then, through heat pump, service the low temperature loop, and then ultimately being able to service our medium temperature loop with heat pump technology, all reliant on this geo-exchange and on the heat recovery. So very innovative approach that got us away from traditional boilers to service a big portion of our heating needs. Through the fact that heat pumps are just inherently far more efficient than boilers, we're able to get those financial KPIs back in line to where they needed to be to achieve the project and not have to put in a cogen. But I can tell you there were a lot of upset people for sure because of that big change that we needed to do. The other challenge that we had in this type of complex project is dealing with these multi-party collaborations, contracts that are in place. You can see that we had both the university, we had this private sector partnership called Pivot involved. We had private lenders, we had a public lender in the form of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, we had our own owner engineer, and we need to align all of these contracts, align all of these different motivations and incentives. And if there's any lesson learned in that, it's that we just simply didn't start earlier enough in that process. We spent a lot of time in our pursuit process on the design, on the technical, and in the commercial terms, we left too late. And as a result, I think it prolonged us being able to actually start and execute this project. And it was, if anything, for myself, a key learning. Do that stuff as soon as we can, as soon as we have a preferred proponent, and make sure that we have as much alignment as possible right from the get-go. So what does this mean in terms of overall lessons learned? I think the first one is you can see we call it dare, be ambitious. And for us, this was saying, can we launch a project that has impact, that reduces our emissions by 50%? And in fact, we got to a place where we're reducing it by over 60% because of that ambition and because of that second point of focusing on outcomes versus focusing on technologies. Now, I did put within reason because ultimately we had a tough decision to make. It was financially based, and that's what I mean within reason. At the end of the day, we need to present a project that is financially reasonable, that's going to get through our governance processes. So we needed to balance those two. I cannot speak enough about the process in terms of having that contest to select our partner. Maybe contest is the wrong word, but that 6-month design competition was phenomenal in terms of having the teams afford the opportunity to look at our own plants and campus, but also us going through that process and hearing the conversation, and us also going through it, I think, led to a better innovation. Agility, I think, is an important part. That I can't emphasize this enough. Although I said, we decided not to go with a cogen, sounds simple enough. When we had 6 months of design leading towards a solution that really was enabled, at least financially, by this cogen, to have to say, we need to rethink, we need to stop, we need to be agile, that was tough. I honestly think maybe a couple of times the project was going to fall apart because of that. But we were able to persevere through it with ourselves, partners, and I think that was key. And I think the lesson learned there is not only to be agile, but right from the get-go, having that stakeholder alignment ensures that allows us to do that. There is probably a whole other talk that our technical staff can give on the innovation here, especially around the cascading heat pumps approach. Maybe I'll save it for that, but I think that innovation allowed us to actually do a project of this size. And lastly, none of this happens without a team. I think that we could have spent at the beginning more time building those teams. I can tell you, though, since in January of this year, we launched the project and we spent specific time focusing on team building. We had a whole team building retreat. We took 40 individuals, our team from the technical side from Pivot. We did these retreats to really just talk about building that team. How do we work together? Because it's going to be through that team that we're going to be successful in the coming years. So that is the presentation. I guess normally we do questions, but this is pre-recorded, so hopefully you have a chance to come to the session. And thank you very much.